Gold, sir.
Yeah.
All right, pop it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the After Buzz podcast. My name is Nico Adjimian, your host of the After Buzz, and with me is Buzz Adams.
Hello.
And if you are hearing me mention gold, that's what we were spinning just before we started recording. For some reason, what were you singing from The Wizard of Oz?
The Coroner's song.
The Coroner's
When
song.
the Coroner Munchkin comes out. And he goes, you ready?
No, not that one. When we started this whole thing, you were going...
And
you kept just saying...
That's how we laugh the day away in the merry old land of Oz.
Yeah.
It's what they sing once they get to the Emerald City.
And then I said, The Wiz did it better. And you said, you've never seen The Wiz.
I said, you've never seen The Wiz. I've seen The Wiz.
I've seen The Wiz.
I've seen The Wiz.
Michael Jackson as the Scarecrow.
Nipsey Russell, I think, was the Tin Man.
He was.
But
then you said it wasn't your cup of tea.
I mean, I've seen the original Wizard of Oz because it was one of the DVDs that we would put in, in the back seat. The kids could watch it.
Yep.
So I have heard it.
Oh, well, you've heard it a lot.
The original Wizard of Oz.
Like for your daughters?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then I said that musicals just aren't my cup of tea. But I didn't even enjoy the musical parts of the regular Wizard of Oz. And we were trying to think of the songs. And then you started singing the Munchkin Man?
No, the Coroner. As coroner, I must aver, I've thoroughly examined her, and she's not only merely dead, she's really most sincerely dead.
Beautiful. Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, very nice. Very nice. All right, on today's episode of the After Buzz, we're going to keep it short because Buzz has a very important appointment to get to.
I do. I have a doctor's appointment.
He's finally
today. Thank you.
taking the bullet, biting the bullet, taking care of himself.
We'll see.
All right. So today's episode of the After Buzz, we're going to be talking about the Kennedys.
Oh, boy.
You know, those Kennedys. The ones that started a political dynasty, I guess you could say.
The closest America has ever had to a royal family. I've heard people describe the Kennedy family that way.
And their history alone is fascinating. And I suggest anybody look up Joseph Sr., Joseph P. Kennedy, and look up his life story. His dad was already a famous businessman. Like,
wait, JFK's dad or
JFK's grandfather?
Okay,
was already a famous businessman from the Boston area. Mm-hmm. So they kind of, they all had a leg up and were involved in politics.
I guess Joe Kennedy, the dad,
Joe Sr.,
really pushed all of his sons. I mean, he kind of had it in mind that one of them was going to be in the White House. It turned out two of them were in the White House.
Essentially was grooming them for that. But he had been so involved in politics and business that he came across political powerhouses like FDR early on, when FDR was the assistant deputy, either way, he was assistant to the Navy, secretary of the Navy.
It had something to do with the Navy.
During World War I.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Joseph Sr. was an assistant general manager at the Bethesda Naval Construction Yard.
Oh, okay.
So
thought he was in doing a little rum running on the side too.
Yeah,
there's a big story about the Kennedys is that they made money during Prohibition.
That they made lots of money during Prohibition by working with Frank Costello, the mobster Frank Costello, who and him and Lucky Luciano started the Luciano crime family.
If you'd never watched, there's an HBO drama called Boardwalk Empire that had Steve Buscemi. It's the same guys who made Sopranos. They made this one following The Sopranos. Joseph Kennedy Sr. shows up in the fifth or final season.
That's pretty interesting.
Right. Well, it didn't seem like he was completely 100% on the level with everything, but
I think what had happened was Joseph Sr.'s grandfather didn't really come from nothing, or maybe it was his father. No, it was his grandfather. Didn't really come from anything, and bought some saloons.
Oh.
So I think they always had business interests in alcohol. So that's interesting. I mean, it kind of makes sense. But today we're going to be
How
talking
about the? Did you read about the sister that they had lobotomized?
Rose Kennedy?
Yeah,
Rosemary Kennedy.
and the reason they had her lobotomized, as far as I can tell, everything I've read is that she was not as scholastically successful as the other kids, not as smart, and she was just had a wild side, and they saw that as such a disappointment. They had a doctor perform to lobotomize her, and she required, care in an institution the rest of her life. I don't think right now would a doctor ever recommend a prefrontal lobotomy.
No,
right?
No, it's completely out of fashion. I wouldn't say that there are some surgical procedures that they will do similar. Like, for example, there's a bridge that
the corpus callosum.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So, God damn it. So, the bridge between the left and right hemispheres of your brain is called the corpus callosum, and they will perform a surgery disconnecting that entire bridge, left and right, for super severe epilepsy.
Yeah.
And maybe some other.
But there have been documented cases of people having the corpus callosum severed
and being fine. Yeah.
But also some
personality differences. Yeah.
There was one person who had in an accident had their corpus callosum severed, and he would be buttoning his shirts with one hand and unbuttoning with the other. Like
that's insane.
They were working against each other. As one hand was buttoning his buttons, his other hand was unbuttoning all the buttons that he had just buttoned. And it all had to do with that particular brain damage.
We should talk about this on another episode about certain brain disorders, because some are fascinating. Have you ever read the book or seen the book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat Rack?
Yeah, I've seen that book before, yeah.
Yeah, it's by a famous neurologist named Oliver Sacks, I believe. Mm-hmm. And he has a collection of all the stories. Anyways, yes. Rose Kennedy's condition, because from what I was reading, she might have actually had some disabilities, and they might have just been learning disabilities.
She may not have excelled in the way that the Kennedy
right,
children
but she might have
had
dyslexia or ADHD, something that was
she might have just been a free-spirited woman who happened to be born in the 19-teens, Well,
okay, so what I wanted to talk about was the top secret mission in World War II that killed Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., the heir apparent to the
oldest
dynasty.
Of the sons.
Yeah, named right after his father. He was the one that was truly groomed from the day he was born to become president. I didn't know anything about him. I mean, of course, I had never read a Kennedy biography before, but if you just went through American history in high school and middle school, somebody like this would never pop up on your radar.
Yeah, unlikely, I guess.
Right. And the history is kind of really fascinating because JFK was really never supposed to be in this position. He was considered not good looking enough, that he was considered too wild. And
he pulled Marilyn Monroe's.
So both of the Kennedy boys, Joe and John.
Yeah, I think the others, definitely Teddy, but I think also Robert might have been too young to serve in World War II, but John Kennedy did, and Joe Kennedy died in World War II.
Oh, here's the phrase I was thinking of, why they never expected John F. Kennedy to have a career in politics, because, quote, he was considered too sloppy, too fun-loving, and too physically unhealthy.
He was that is one thing that people probably don't realize about John Kennedy, is that he had severely debilitating illnesses. Because you look at him, he looks like the picture of health, but I guess he was on a bunch of different prescriptions. The prescriptions had side effects.
Right.
It was really, had a rough go of it from the standpoint of his health.
Joe Jr., Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., was the first child of Joe Sr., and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, the daughter of a Boston mayor. He was the oldest of 9, and in her memoir, his mom, Rose, wrote, Joe Jr. bore a certain forcefulness of character that marked him as a natural leader even in his youth. His younger siblings looked up to him, and he in turn set a strong example by excelling in school and sports. So really kind of this golden child to everybody. When his dad. So he goes to college. They all go to college, and he gets out around the time that Hitler is taking power. So Joe Jr. actually gets to visit Germany during this time, and he learned about the Nazis' forced sterilization program. And he says he praised this for doing away with many of the disgusting specimens of men which inhabit this earth.
That's Joe Jr.?
That's Joe Jr. writing to his dad, actually.
Yikes.
And historians are kind of surprised by this stance, given that Rose Kennedy did have intellectual disabilities, according to
the sister
right.
who ended up in the sanatorium.
And he says this dislike of Jews, however, was well-founded, claiming that Hitler had offered the scattered, despondent, and divorced from hope Germans a common enemy. It was excellent psychology, and it was too bad that it had to be done to the Jews. Interesting, right?
Yeah, and
these are all in letters to his dad, who at the time was serving as U.S. ambassador to Britain. So anyways, he eventually was a delegate at the 1940, I believe, presidential convention, because that was the third run for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. And he famously, at the Democratic National Convention, he did not pledge to vote for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He planned to vote for Postmaster General James Farley. And he was under a lot of pressure to switch his allegiance to the president because his dad was appointed as an ambassador by him. But
what does it say if your own son won't vote for the president who made you the ambassador to the UK?
But he said he remains steadfast in his choice, believing, quote, no commander-in-chief should be allowed to serve 3 terms. And everybody at that convention applauded him for it.
Wow.
And he was even told by his dad was even told that his son, quote, seemed to gain the respect of everybody there. I am sure he can have a political future if he wants one. All right, so during World War II, him and his brother enlist in the Navy. Joe as a pilot, and I guess John
on a PT boat.
On a boat. He defended his decision in a letter to his dad again, because his dad was all for no fighting by the U.S., and he said, quote, Joe said, people are going to wonder what the devil I'm doing back at school with everyone else working hard for national defense with your stand on the war. Because Joseph was the heir apparent, he was kind of put at a base in Virginia running missions along the Atlantic coast. Meanwhile, John was sent to the Pacific. Mm-hmm. Do you know what happened to his boat? Do you know the story of John F. Kennedy's
boat was sunk, and I guess he helped rescue any number of his fellow survivors?
Yes.
That's what I've always read. PT 109, I believe, is the famous boat number.
That's it. Mm-hmm. A Japanese destroyer rammed into it, knocking everybody off. And apparently he was such a good leader that he had already been promoted.
We're talking about John
F. Kennedy. Yeah, JFK had been promoted to a lieutenant already, doing very well in his command. And he had been cited as exhibiting great bravery during the incident, leading 11 surviving sailors to a nearby island before swimming, sometimes solo, to neighboring islands in search of food and aid. Mm-hmm. All with this bad back and this... Did he have to wear a brace or anything? Was that a famous thing I'm thinking of, or no?
You know, people just did not know as much about elected officials' lives as they do now, you know? So... I don't know if that was ever public knowledge or not, that he wore a back brace. He did wear a back brace, yeah.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The press, the Navy...
He had to wear that back brace because he's doing a wild thing all night with Marilyn Monroe.
I can't imagine the sex was great from John F. Kennedy.
Marilyn might have been kind of a pillow princess, too.
Ride it. A pillow princess.
That's the way you have to hawk to spit on that thing. Give it the old hawk to Marilyn. That's it. That's the happy spot.
You have to do a JFK impression on the show. Okay, so I think this is where the story gets very interesting. Now, remember, there's a lot of pressure on not just Joe, but there is intense pressure on Joe to become the model of somebody that will eventually become president.
Joe Jr.,
right. But after Joe Jr. died, and he died in World War II, John F. Kennedy, JFK, is quoted as saying this: "Just as I went into politics because Joe died, if anything happened to me tomorrow, my brother Bobby would run. And if Bobby died, Teddy would take over for him." That's how much political pressure was put on them by their father, and the expectations that no matter if one died, the next Kennedy's going to have to take the burden.
And if you couldn't rise to the occasion, well, we've got a lobotomy waiting for you.
And we got a nice ice pick waiting at home.
Right up the nostril.
So I thought this was really interesting because the press, the Navy, and friends and family praised John F. Kennedy as a hero after the PT-109 disaster. Mm-hmm. He was hailed as a hero by everyone. And Joe Jr., while happy his brother, I'm sure, had escaped death, felt overshadowed and felt eager to prove himself. Quote, "Colleagues commented later on his intense preoccupation with putting himself in harm's way."
So he had kind of gotten this cushy job.
Right.
You know, kind of like George W. Bush and the Alabama Air National Guard.
Right.
But because of his brother's heroics, he put himself in more danger?
Yes. Fellow pilot Louis Pappas recalled, "There was never an occasion for a mission that meant extra hazard that Joe didn't volunteer for. He had everybody's unlimited admiration and respect for his courage, zeal, and willingness to undertake the most dangerous missions." In September of 1943, he was sent over to Britain to start flying patrols directly in the English Channel and the Bay of Biscay.
Because we had... Wait a minute, but we had not entered the war at that point, or had we? What year did you say?
43.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. And he had, by May of 44, he had flown 25 missions on the airplane, which was the minimum requirement for a reassignment. Basically, they're saying, you did your time. You flew 25.
You don't have to fly any more of these missions that
are
every
very
one
dangerous.
Of them could be your last.
Yeah, you can be sent back
You
to the
can
United
rest
States.
on your laurels. Something tells me he probably didn't do that, though.
He didn't. Even though he had permission to return home, he opted to stay in the fight. In mid-June, he wrote to his parents saying, "I now have 39 missions and will probably have 50 by the time I leave. It is far more than anyone else on the base, but it doesn't prove a hell of a lot."
Wow.
So I'm going to get to the point where he dies. He was offered a top secret mission to work on. They were trying to essentially develop drone technology in the 40s. Basically, take some old bombers that weren't being used, hook up some radios to them, and use them as remote control. Yeah, but they needed some test pilots.
Okay.
And he volunteered to be one of the first test pilots.
He didn't die in combat? I'm getting ahead of us?
A little bit.
Okay.
So he wrote to his parents in 1944, excuse me. "I'm going to do something different for the next 3 weeks. It is secret. I am not allowed to say what it is, but it isn't dangerous, so don't worry." Now, his dad wrote back to him, "I can quite understand how you feel about staying in the fight, but don't force your luck too much." 3 days after that reply, a hollowed out B-52 bomber carrying Joe Jr. and his co-pilot exploded over England, killing both men. It was a fatal failure for Operation Aphrodite, which sought to transform battle-worn bombers into uncrewed radio-controlled missiles.
You know, I did not know any of that about Joe Kennedy Jr.
I know, right? Isn't it kind of fascinating that John would only... Now, this is where I kind of feel almost sad for John F. K.
John F. K?
That works, too.
I guess. John F. K.
Because it dealt a staggering blow to the Kennedy family. Upon hearing the news of his brother's demise, this is the first thing John F. Kennedy says about after hearing his brother's death. Now the burden falls to me.
Yeah.
Crazy. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the After Buzz podcast. Let us know what you think about Buzz's health, about
you do not need to do that.
Any kind of thing that you think about, or our story today. Don't forget to listen to the After Buzz Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the regular Buzz Adams Morning Show Monday through Friday, 6 to 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time on 95.5 KLAQ.